Hey everyone, welcome to the investor.bet AFL Round 1 Betting Trends Preview. In this video, we're going to look at each of the 9 games coming up this week, go through what the odds are and the historical matchups between these two sides so you can see how the bookmakers have adjusted from their previous meetings and any betting trends that have stood out, like have their previous matchups been going over the total or under the total, and what have those totals been so that you can use that information with your analysis, plus what were the odds in their previous meetings compared to what they are for this game. And I'm going to go through my early thoughts on each one of these games of what I'm considering betting into and how I'm going to approach betting into these games before I make my final decisions in the AFL best bets later in the week. We started the season going 2-0 in the Hawks Swans game and then in the GWS Collingwood game. So I'm looking to continue that moving forward into the games this week. We start with Richmond versus Carlton, which, from a betting perspective on the money line, it doesn't really get you that excited. Carlton are $1.06. Richmond $9.50. That line's moved even more from the 47.5 up to 50.5 right now. And the total has stayed at 178.5, which has been the highest total we've seen between these two sides across their past 5 meetings. You can see there that no game has had a total of 176.5 or more. And 3 of the past 4 between these two sides have gone under the total. Their most recent meeting in round 16 last year did go over the 170.5, largely thanks to the 131 points from Carlton. Carlton have covered 3 of the past 4 versus Richmond, and this is a game that they'll win and win very, very convincingly. There is strong possibility they run up a score in this game as well. So that concerns me a little bit for taking an under, but we're getting a total that's verging on 180, which is a very, very high number. So for this to go over, you're going to need at least 130 points from Carlton, I am expecting. So that is a little bit concerning. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to play it from at this stage. I think Carlton win and win convincingly, and we'll most likely be looking at some player props in the opening game. Then we have Hawthorn versus Essendon. Hawthorn are $1.31 minus 20.5. That line hasn't moved. The totals moved down from 169.5 down to 168.5. Even though 7 of the past 8 between these two sides have gone over the total points line. So this matchup has a history of being high scoring. Essendon scored 107 or more in each of the past 3, and they have won and covered 6 of the past 7 versus Hawthorn. This is obviously their first game of the season, where Hawthorn come into this off the win against Sydney at the SCG last week. You'd expect Hawthorn to be winning this game. I think the only thing that's raising some questions is Essendon's history against Hawthorn. But I think Hawthorn win convincingly. Essendon's right down in the premiership market there. 5th last in the overall odds to win the premiership. And I think there's just too big of a gap between these two sides. Hawthorn have that bit of match fitness, so could run away with this game late, as we saw, in the opening round games, and something we see early on in the season every year. Sides kind of drop away a little bit late in the 3rd and into the 4th quarter. We saw that in both games last week. Hawthorn were the strongest side out of the 2 games and 4 teams. Hawthorn were the strongest side last week in those final stages, so they could really run away with this late against the Bombers. So potentially looking at second half plays for Hawthorn, likely to be a high scoring game and Hawthorn to win well. Geelong versus Fremantle. Geelong $1.47 minus 13.5 point favorites, and the total stayed at 170.5. The past 5 of the past 6 between these two sides have gone under the total points line. Last time they met, or last 2 times, in fact, it's both been 168.5 and gone under that number. Interestingly, out of the past 4 games, only once has a team scored over 77 points, which was Fremantle in round 10, 2023 at home, scoring 106. Fremantle have won and covered 3 of the past 4. The only one they lost was the last matchup, so the only time they met last season. Fremantle lost at home as a 10.5 point favorite, where Geelong won that game by 11 points. But their last 2 trips to GMHBA Stadium. Fremantle have won. So in round 2023, they won as $10.50 underdogs, and the line was 48.5. They won that game by 7 points. Going back to 2022, in their previous visit, they won by 3 as $4 underdogs, and if I went back a little bit further, they have won 3 of the past 5 at GMHBA. So very, very good record. A lot of sides don't play well there, and Geelong have a great record, but Fremantle have been one of those sides where they've struggled against them. So, it wouldn't be surprised to see Fremantle keep this game very, very close. And Geelong, I think they're very short at the $1.47, which they're currently priced at. The away team also has a good record in this matchup, regardless of where they're playing, winning and covering 5 of the past 6. Then we have the grand final rematch. Sydney at home against the Brisbane Lions. Brisbane, small favourites, -2.5 up to 3.5 now. Total is 176.5 up to 177.5. 6 of the past 7 games, including the grand final last year, have gone over the total. Last year's grand final only just went over. It was 175.5. They ended with 180 points. Brisbane doing most of the scoring there with the 120. Brisbane have won 6 of the past 7 versus Sydney. This is like the revenge game for the Swans. They're at home, but I am a little bit surprised the odds are as close as they are. Brisbane were clearly the better side when they last met in the grand final, and historically, they've won the past 4 and 6 of the past 7. They've got a very good record against the Swans as well. Sydney have that, they already have their first game under their belt playing Hawthorn last week, but they were hardly impressive in that game. And you would say Brisbane's a better opponent from what we've currently seen over the past 12 months than Hawthorn. So with that in mind, you'd expect Brisbane to get the job done. The away teams covered the past 6 in this matchup. Most of the time that's been as an underdog though, where the home sides always tended to be favourite. Now we've got the Lions, small favourites on the road. You can see what's happened. There's been that slight adjustment from their previous meetings with Brisbane now coming into favour, but I just question if it's enough. The Swans, only showed a little bit in the first quarter and a little bit in the third against Hawthorn, but outside of that, Hawthorn dominated the game. They dominated the middle, didn't let Sydney inside 50, and against Brisbane, can't see too much of that changing. The only real reason you could go with the Swans here are the revenge factors, or you think they didn't take Hawthorn as seriously last week. They had a good record against Hawthorn, so we should get the job done against them, and we'll look ahead to Brisbane. But the way they're coached, I don't think that was the case. Then we have the Western Bulldogs against North Melbourne. The Bulldogs 19.5-point favourites, and that line has stayed at that mark. The total has also stayed at 176.5. 7 of the past 8 between these two sides have gone over. The Western Bulldogs have also won the past 7 versus North Melbourne. Most of the time as very, very big favourites. You can see $1.08, $1.10, $1.19, $1.18, $1.06. Now they're $1.38. Bookmakers expecting the gap between these two sides might have closed a little bit in the off-season. Bulldogs should probably win the game. You've got to be slightly cautious against taking, teams in this kind of price range early on in the season, especially to cover the spread. I think Western Bulldogs will win, but I don't think there's a great deal of value in the current odds. I'll be more so looking at potential total bets in this game, and also disposal bets in North Melbourne games have tended to be very profitable over, the past couple of seasons. So that's most likely how I'm looking at approaching that game. Then we have Collingwood against Port Adelaide. Collingwood, 9.5-point favourites, and the total at 165.5 has held firm, even though the past 5 have all gone over. And last time they met, it was 166.5, also at the MCG, where Collingwood scored 123 points and we got 200 plus score game. Weather dependent, I'd be leaning towards this game going over that number, especially with the history between these two sides. The concern, obviously, is Collingwood were very inaccurate last week against GWS, but I don't think that'll be the case again this week against Port. Collingwood also have a good record against them, winning and covering the past 4. The home team, you can add to that, has covered 8 of the past 10 in this matchup, so that plays well for Collingwood. But from a side perspective, I give Port Adelaide a big chance in this game and wouldn't surprise me at all if they ran out winners as underdogs, and think the value does lie with them, even though, Collingwood's already played a game this season. They were highly impressive in that game. Definitely leaning towards Port Adelaide, and going on history of this matchup, I think it should be a slightly high scoring game. Then we have Adelaide versus St Kilda. This is the first game on Sunday. Adelaide, 19.5-point favorites. Bit of money for St Kilda early. The gaps closed slightly, and the totals come down from the 159.5 to 158.5. 7 of the past 10 between these two sides have gone under. Last time they met, the total was 152.5. St Kilda only scored 39 points, so only 110 points in that game. Adelaide have won and covered 3 of the past 4 versus the Saints, and at home, I feel like they are deserving to be favourites. With a line just over 3 goals, I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch. I wouldn't be surprised if St Kilda kept it closer than that. Historically, this matchup has been a matchup where it's ended up in a blowout. 13 of the past 14 head-to-head have been decided by 21 plus points. So, that leans towards it being, a blowout margin either way. Adelaide have won the past 2 at home against the Saints, both as $1.63 and $1.54 favorites. They're a bit shorter this time around, but overall for this game, it's probably one where I'll be looking to play some disposal markets. Both these sides do concede high number of disposals to the opposition, and they are capable of racking up the numbers themselves. So that's likely how I'll approach that. Melbourne versus GWS Giants, small favorites here, -2.5, and a total of 165.5, which has moved down to 162.5. 4 of the past 6 head-to-head have gone over. Not a huge trend there from that perspective. GWS won the last matchup just by the 2 points. That was their only meeting last season. GWS have now won and covered 3 of the past 4 versus Melbourne, and the away team has won and covered 6 of the past 7. All these signs point to GWS getting the job done. And, I do kind of lean that way, that's for sure. I think, they were pretty good last week against Collingwood, and, it ended up being a blowout margin, but it probably should have been a little bit closer than the final score suggested. But GWS should control most of the ball in this game against Melbourne from what we saw statistically last season, and that should be enough to get them across the line. Interestingly, this matchup has a history of being very close. 4 of the past 6 have been decided by 9 points or less. So we may not get a blowout, but I think GWS should get over the line, and I think a few of their key players will rack up the numbers, similar to the way they did last week against Collingwood. It's a very, very similar matchup for GWS. Just need to do it on the road this time around. Then we have West Coast against Gold Coast. So first game of the season for both of these sides. Gold Coast, $1.50 favorites. It's moved slightly from that -12.5 down to -10.5. And the totals dropped from 165 down to 164.5. 4 of the past 5 between these two sides have gone over. Last time they met, it was 166.5 total. So the totals been bang on what it's been in the past 2 meetings, both games from last year. Both of them were pretty high scoring games. Both of them exceeded the 170 points at either venue. The game in Perth, though, was slightly lower scoring than the game at the Gold Coast. Not a great deal, though, between it. When they were last playing in WA, Gold Coast were 15.5-point favorites, only -12.5 this time around. Gold Coast, similar to the Titans in the NRL, have had an interrupted preparation for this game. But this is a game I think they would have had penciled in that they can win. They showed a lot of improvement last season, and will be disappointing for them to make a trip over to Perth and lose what will now be their first game of the year. They have a good record. They've won 3 of the past 4 versus the Eagles, and have covered 4 of the past 5 against West Coast in Perth as well. So it hasn't, harmed them making this trip, and I think they should get over the line. Also would lean towards this being a higher scoring game, considering we're only getting 165.5 total. So, a lower number than the past 4 meetings, of which 3 went over the number. So that's how I'm looking at approaching the games this weekend. If you want to see everything I'm betting in detail with the staking, so you can follow along with the whole strategy, definitely check out AFL Best Bets. I'll put the link to that in the description. That's where you get every single one of my bets for the round, additional previews, and of course, access to all the bet finance tools. Remember, the betting trends are just one part of my research process. You also get all the statistics, the betting data for size, where they perform the best in those different situations, plus tools analyze goal scorers, disposal markets, and fantasy scores. So we keep track of all of those. Part of the statistical updates I do every week for the AFL. So I'm really excited for the upcoming season. As I said, we started 2-0, and I'll look to continue that in the weeks ahead. I would love to have you a part of it, but thanks for watching these videos on the YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe for more videos like this right throughout the season. Thanks for watching.